Get up, Omega, or stay down and prove them right. The voice cut through the arena like a blade, followed by a ripple of laughter that rolled across the stone stands in waves, sharp and echoing under the high iron arches. Elena Whitmore tasted dust on her lips as her palms pressed against the packed sand, her fingers trembling not from pain, but from the weight of every eye fixed on her. The arena stretched nearly 100 yards across, ringed with rising tiers of wolves in human form, their scents thick in the air, dominance, pride, impatience, pressing against her senses like heat on a summer day. She could hear boots scuffing against stone, hear the low murmur of wagers being placed, hear someone somewhere call her a mistake. A weak Omega, a waste of a slot. She pushed in a breath, slow and careful, her chest tight as if the air itself resisted her. The sunlight overhead burned bright, casting no shadows to hide in, leaving her fully exposed in the center of it all. That was the point. This place wasn't built for mercy. It was built for spectacle, for proving strength, for breaking anything that didn't belong. And Elena didn't belong. She rose anyway. Not quickly, not gracefully, but steadily, her knees locking as she forced herself upright. A few people near the front leaned forward, curious now, as if expecting her to fall again. Someone chuckled. Another voice followed, louder this time. She can barely stand. More laughter. It spread fast, feeding on itself, until it filled the entire arena like a storm gathering overhead. Elena kept her gaze low, not in submission, but in focus. She counted her breaths the way she always did when everything felt too loud. 1, 2, 3. Her hands curled slightly at her sides, the faint warmth in her palms flickering. Barely there, but real. It was the one thing she had that no one else could see. The one thing they dismissed. Weakness, they called it. Useless. She had heard it her entire life. Behind her, footsteps approached, measured, confident. Her opponent. Larger. Stronger. Everything the pack respected. The crowd quieted just enough to listen. You sure you want to do this? He asked, not unkindly, but not kindly either. It was the tone of someone certain of the outcome. Elena didn't look at him. Her throat felt dry, but her voice came out steady. I'm already here. A pause. Then a scoff. Somewhere above, a spectator clapped once, slow and mocking. The sound echoed. Elena lifted her chin just slightly, enough to see the edges of the arena. The banners hanging, the guards standing motionless, the endless sea of faces waiting for her to fail. Her heart pounded, loud enough she was sure others could hear it, but she didn't move back, didn't step away, didn't lower herself. The sand beneath her feet felt unsteady, but she adjusted, grounding herself. Another murmur rolled through the crowd, this time edged with anticipation. They wanted something. A stumble. A surrender. A reason to confirm what they already believed. Elena exhaled slowly, the faint warmth in her hands growing just a fraction, like a quiet ember refusing to die out. She had nothing they valued. No brute strength. No dominance. No claim to power. But she had this, and she had the choice not to break. Her opponent shifted, preparing, the tension in the air tightening like a drawn line. Elena's shoulders squared, small but unyielding. Her pulse steadied. Her fear didn't vanish. It settled, sharpened, turned into something she could carry instead of something that crushed her. The arena held its breath. And for a single, fragile moment, before anything else could happen, Elena Whitmore stood in the center of it all, not as what they called her, not as what they expected, but as someone who refused to disappear. The first step toward her was deliberate, unhurried, the kind of movement that carried certainty rather than threat, and the sand shifted under his boots with a soft scrape that echoed louder than it should have in the silence that followed. Elena felt it before she reacted, that shift in attention, the crowd leaning in as if pulled by the same invisible thread, waiting for her to falter now that the moment had truly begun, and her breath caught for half a second before she forced it steady. Again, grounding herself the way she always had, counting, anchoring, refusing to let the noise inside her become louder than the noise around her, because if she lost that control, even for a second, they would see it, and they would never let her forget it. You can still walk away, the man in front of her said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear, but there was no real offer in it, only expectation, as if he already knew she would not take it. and maybe that was what unsettled her most. Not his size or the strength in his stance, but the assumption that she would choose to endure, rather than escape, because that was what they all believed about Omegas like her, that they would endure anything, absorb anything, and call it survival. Elena lifted her gaze just enough to meet his eyes for a brief second, long enough to show that she had heard him, that she understood exactly what he meant, and then she shook her head once, small but certain, and the corner of his mouth twitched as if he had expected that answer all along. Somewhere above them, a voice rang out, louder now, emboldened by the tension. "Do not drag it out," followed by a ripple of agreement, the crowd growing restless, impatient for something decisive, something that would confirm the story they had already written about her before she ever stepped onto the sand. Elena shifted her weight slightly, adjusting her footing, feeling the uneven ground beneath her shoes, the fine grains sliding just enough to remind her that nothing here was stable. Not the arena, not the crowd, not even the moment itself. And yet she steadied anyway, shoulders drawing back, chin lifting just a fraction higher than before, because if they were going to watch her, she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her shrink. The heat of the sun pressed down on her, warming the back of her neck, and a bead of sweat traced slowly along her temple. But her hands remained at her sides, fingers flexing once as that faint, familiar warmth stirred again beneath her skin. Subtle, almost invisible, but present, always. Present, like a quiet pulse that refused to disappear no matter how many times she had been told it meant nothing. "Then do not say, I did not warn you," the man said, stepping closer now, closing the space between them to just a few feet, close enough that she could feel the difference in their presence, the way his confidence filled the air while hers had to be held together piece by piece. And yet she did not step back, not even an inch, her heels pressing into the sand as if anchoring herself to the ground. The crowd quieted again, the earlier laughter fading into something sharper, more focused. Anticipation tightening the atmosphere like a held breath, and Elena became aware of every small detail all at once, the distant creak of the arena gates in the wind, the faint rustle of fabric from the stands, the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears, and beneath it all, that same quiet warmth in her palms, growing just enough to remind her that she was not entirely powerless, no matter what they believed. Her opponent shifted his stance, preparing, and instinctively, Elena mirrored him in the smallest way, not copying his strength, but finding her own balance, her own center, and for a brief moment, something unexpected flickered across his expression, not doubt, not exactly, but a pause, a recognition that she was not reacting the way he had anticipated. It lasted less than a second, but the crowd noticed, a murmur rippling outward, curiosity threading through their earlier mockery. And Elena felt it, that shift, subtle but real, the first crack in the narrative they had built around her. She drew in another slow breath, her voice quiet when she finally spoke, but steady enough to carry across the small space between them. "I am still here." And it was not defiance, not a challenge, just a simple statement of fact, but something about it lingered, hanging in the air longer than it should have, as if even the arena itself had paused to listen. For the first time since she had stepped onto the sand, the laughter did not return immediately, and in that fragile silence, Elena Whitmore stood her ground, not because she believed she would win, but because she refused to disappear. "Do it already," someone called from the stands, impatience slicing through the fragile quiet, and the spell of stillness shattered as the crowd surged back to life, voices layering over one another until the air felt thick with expectation again. Elena felt the shift immediately, the pressure returning, heavier this time, because now they were watching more closely, not just waiting for her to fail, but curious to see how she would fall, and that curiosity was sharper than mockery, more dangerous, because it meant she had their attention. Her opponent exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders once as if settling into something inevitable, and when he moved again it was with a measured precision that made the space between them feel smaller than it was. Each step controlled, each motion deliberate, not rushed, not careless. And Elena understood then that this was not about proving anything for him. It was about completing something expected, finishing a task the arena had already decided the outcome of. She shifted her weight again, grounding herself, her senses stretching outward despite herself, catching fragments of everything at once: the scrape of boots on stone, the low hum of conversation above, the faint metallic tang in the air that clung to the arena like a memory, and beneath it all, that steady rhythm in her chest, her heartbeat refusing to slow even as she forced her breathing into something calm. He circled slightly, not closing in fully, but adjusting the angle, testing, observing, and Elena mirrored him in the smallest way, her movements subtle, almost unnoticeable unless someone was truly looking, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt less like she was being cornered and more like she was choosing where to stand. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice still low, still controlled. But there was something else there now, not frustration, not quite respect, but an awareness that she was not reacting the way he had been prepared for, and that alone was enough to disrupt the rhythm he had expected. Elena did not answer immediately, her gaze steady now, no longer avoiding his, because there was nothing left to hide behind, no place in this arena that would let her disappear, and if she was going to be seen, then she would be seen as she was, not as they had decided she should be. The warmth in her palms pulsed again, faint but insistent, and this time she did not ignore it, did not try to push it down or dismiss it as something insignificant. She let it settle, let it exist, even as the voices around her grew louder again. A shout rose from somewhere to her left, laughter following close behind, and then another voice, sharper, cutting through the noise, "End it," and the words seemed to ripple outward, picked up and repeated, not in unison, but close enough that it became a single, pressing demand. Her opponent stepped closer again, closing the distance to just a few feet, and the tension in the air tightened, the crowd leaning forward as one, drawn into the moment as if they could pull the outcome toward them through sheer will. Elena felt it all, the weight of expectation, the certainty of what they believed would happen next, and for a fraction of a second, doubt flickered through her, quick and sharp, a reminder of every time she had been told she was not enough, not strong enough, not fast enough, not anything enough to stand where she was standing now. Her fingers curled slightly, the warmth in her hands flaring just enough to catch her attention again, and she focused on that instead, on the small, steady presence that had always been hers, even when no one else saw it, even when she herself had tried to ignore it. She lifted her chin a little higher, her voice quiet when she finally spoke, but clear enough to carry. "Maybe it is not supposed to be easy." And the words were simple, almost unremarkable, but something about them shifted the space between them, not dramatically, not enough for the crowd to notice immediately, but enough for the man in front of her to pause, just slightly, his gaze sharpening as if reassessing something he had already decided. The pause was brief, but it was there, and Elena felt it. That small disruption in the certainty that had filled the arena from the moment she stepped onto the sand, and for the first time, the outcome did not feel entirely written. The crowd stirred again, restless, sensing the hesitation without understanding it, their voices rising in confusion, in impatience, in the need for the moment to resolve the way they expected, and Elena stood in the center of it all, her heartbeat steadying, her breath even, her presence no longer shrinking beneath their attention, but holding, just enough to be seen, just enough to exist on her own terms. The shift in the air was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but Elena felt it the same way she felt the warmth in her palms, a quiet change beneath the surface that did not belong to the crowd or the man standing in front of her, something deeper, heavier, as if the arena itself had drawn in a breath it had not yet released. Her opponent noticed it too, though he did not understand it, his posture tightening for a fraction of a second before he dismissed it, refocusing on her with the same steady intent, and yet that brief hesitation lingered like an echo neither of them could quite place. "You are not supposed to hold this long," he said, not mocking now, but stating something that sounded closer to confusion, as if she had stepped outside a script he had followed too many times to question, and Elena almost smiled at that, not because it was amusing, but because for the first time, someone else could see that she was not where she was expected to be. She did not answer him, not with words, because words would only give the crowd something to twist, something to laugh at, and she was done feeding them that. Instead, she shifted her stance again, small and controlled, grounding herself more firmly, the sand pressing back against her weight, as if acknowledging her presence rather than swallowing it. The voices around them rose and fell in uneven waves, confusion threading through the impatience now, the earlier certainty cracking into something less stable, and Elena felt it like a current running through the space, feeding into her awareness, sharpening her focus instead of overwhelming it. A sharp whistle cut through the noise, followed by a command from somewhere high in the stands, authoritative, clipped, maintain the pace. And it snapped the moment back into motion, reminding everyone, including her opponent, that this was still an arena, still a performance, still something that needed to end. He exhaled once, steadying himself, and stepped forward again, this time without hesitation, closing the distance until only a few feet remained between them, and the pressure of his presence pressed against her like a wall, solid and unyielding. But Elena did not retreat, her heels anchoring into the sand, her shoulders square, her gaze steady. The warmth in her hands flared again, stronger this time, not painful, not overwhelming, just present in a way that made it impossible to ignore, and for a brief moment, she let herself lean into it, not as a weapon, not as something to prove, but as something that simply existed within her, something that did not need their approval to be real. Her opponent paused again, just for a second, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he could sense that shift without understanding it, and the crowd reacted instantly, a murmur rising, sharper now, restless, unsettled by the delay, by the lack of resolution they had been promised from the beginning. What is he waiting for? Someone demanded, and another voice answered with a laugh that did not quite reach the same confidence as before, and Elena realized then that the arena was no longer entirely certain of itself, that the story they had expected to watch was beginning to slip out of their control, even if they did not yet know why. She drew in a slow breath, the air filling her lungs, steady and grounding, and when she exhaled, her voice followed, quiet but unwavering. I am not here to make it easy for you. And this time, there was no tremor, no hesitation, just a calm certainty that settled into the space between them like something solid. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough that she saw it, that flicker of something new, not pity, not dismissal, but recognition, and it held for a fraction longer than before, long enough for the moment to stretch, to deepen, to shift into something neither of them had expected when this began. The crowd reacted again, louder this time, their voices overlapping in confusion, in frustration, in the need to push the moment back into something familiar, something predictable, but it no longer fit as neatly as it had before, and Elena stood. She let it exist, let it ground her, let it remind her that she was not as empty as they believed. The sand shifted beneath her feet as she moved, not retreating, but turning slightly, creating space where there had been none, and the motion was small, almost insignificant, but it was enough to disrupt the clean, expected line of movement her opponent had been following, enough to make him pause again. Just for a fraction of a second, the crowd reacted immediately, a sharp murmur rising, confusion threading through their voices as the moment stretched longer than it should have, as the outcome refused to settle into place. And Elena felt it all, the tension, the uncertainty, the growing impatience, but it no longer pressed against her in the same way. It no longer threatened to crush her. Instead, it seemed to pass around her, as if she had stepped slightly outside its reach. What are you doing? Her opponent muttered under his breath, not in anger, but in genuine confusion now. And Elena met his gaze fully for the first time, her eyes steady, her expression calm in a way that felt unfamiliar even to herself. She did not answer him, because there was nothing she could say that would make him understand what she barely understood herself. Instead, she simply held her ground, her presence quiet but undeniable, and for a moment, the space between them shifted again, not defined by strength or dominance, but by something else entirely, something that did not fit within the rules of the arena. Above them, the voices grew louder, sharper, frustration bleeding into their tone as the delay stretched on, as the moment refused to resolve. And then a new sound cut through it all, deeper this time, closer, not loud, but heavy enough to silence everything else for a fraction of a second. Elena felt it before she fully heard it, a low resonance that seemed to settle into her bones, and her breath caught. Just for a moment, as her awareness flickered outward beyond the arena, beyond the crowd, towards something approaching, something that carried a presence unlike anything she had ever felt before. Her opponent felt it too, his posture tightening, his gaze flickering briefly toward the massive gates at the far end of the arena, and the crowd followed, their voices faltering, their attention shifting in a wave that rolled through the stands like a sudden change in wind. The air itself seemed to still, the restless energy that had filled the arena moments before collapsing into a tense, expectant silence. And Elena stood at the center of it all, her heartbeat steady, her breath even, her hands still warm with that quiet, persistent energy that had never left her. She did not know what was coming, did not understand why the shift felt so significant, but she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her chest, that whatever was about to step through those gates would change everything. And as the silence deepened, stretching longer than any moment before it, Elena Whitmore did not look away, did not lower her gaze, but stood exactly where she was, ready to face whatever the arena had not planned for. The gates did not open all at once. They moved slowly, deliberately, the heavy iron dragging against stone with a deep, echoing groan that rolled across the arena and settled into every corner of the space. And with that single sound, everything changed. The crowd that had been restless only seconds before fell into a silence so complete it felt unnatural, as if even their breath had been taken from them. And Elena felt it in her chest, that same quiet pressure she had sensed before, now stronger, undeniable, like standing at the edge of something vast and unseen. Her opponent stepped back without thinking, just half a step, but enough to break the line he had been holding, enough to show that whatever was coming through those gates did not belong to the same rules as the rest of them. Elena did not move, not because she was fearless, but because something in her refused to retreat now. Not after everything that had already shifted, not after she had finally found a place to stand. The sunlight seemed dimmer near the entrance, shadows stretching long across the sand as the opening widened. And then he stepped through, not with urgency, not with force, but with a stillness that carried more weight than any movement could have. Alpha King Cale Thornridge did not need to announce himself. The silence did it for him. The way the entire arena seemed to hold its breath the moment his presence touched the space. He moved forward at an unhurried pace, each step measured, controlled, the distance between him and the center of the arena closing without effort, and Elena felt it before she fully looked at him. The way the air shifted, heavier, sharper, as if every instinct in her body had suddenly become aware of something it could not ignore. The crowd reacted in waves, not with noise, but with movement, bodies straightening, heads lowering, a ripple of recognition and submission that spread outward from the gates like a tide. And even those who had been the loudest before now stood in complete stillness, as if afraid to draw attention to themselves. Elena's opponent lowered his gaze immediately, stepping back another pace, his earlier confidence dissolving into something quieter, more cautious, and Elena understood then, without needing anyone to explain it, that this was not simply authority, not just power. This was something deeper, something absolute. She lifted her eyes slowly, not out of defiance, but because she needed to see, needed to understand what had shifted the entire arena with nothing more than a presence. And when her gaze met his, even from across the sand, the world seemed to narrow into a single, suspended moment. His eyes were not what she expected, not cold, not cruel, but sharp, focused in a way that felt like being seen too clearly, like every layer of pretense had been stripped away before she even realized she had them. He did not look at the crowd, did not acknowledge the arena or the expectations that had filled it only moments before. His attention moved once, deliberately, and settled on her. Elena felt it like a physical thing, that focus, that recognition, and her breath caught, just for a second, as something inside her responded, not with fear, but with that same quiet warmth that had been growing within her since she stepped onto the sand, now stronger, steadier, as if it had been waiting for this moment without her knowing. No one spoke, no one moved. The entire arena suspended in that single line of sight between them, and Elena stood exactly where she had been, her shoulders squared, her hands still at her sides, her presence no longer small or uncertain, but held together by something she could not yet name. Cale Thornridge stopped just inside the arena, not yet at the center, not yet close enough to touch, but close enough that his presence filled the space completely. And for a moment that stretched longer than it should have, he simply looked at her, as if the rest of the world had ceased to matter entirely. And in that silence, deeper than anything that had come before, Elena Whitmore realized that the arena had lost control of the story the moment he stepped through those gates. No one told him to stop, but he did, and that was what made the silence heavier than before, because it was not obedience that held the arena still, it was choice. Cale Thornridge stood just within the threshold of the sand, his presence settling into the space like something immovable, and for a long moment, he did nothing at all, his gaze fixed on Elena as if the thousands surrounding them had ceased to exist. The crowd waited, not daring to interrupt, not daring to question the earlier noise replaced by a tension so tight it felt like the air itself might fracture under it. Elena felt that gaze in a way she could not explain, not like being watched, but like being understood too clearly, like every layer she had built to protect herself had been seen through without effort, and yet there was no judgment in it, no dismissal, only a steady, unwavering focus that made her chest tighten for reasons she could not name. Her opponent remained where he had stepped back, his posture rigid now, his eyes lowered, and the shift in him was unmistakable, the confidence that had once defined him replaced by a careful stillness, as if he were suddenly aware that this moment no longer belonged to him. Elena did not look away, even as her breath caught briefly in her throat, even as the warmth in her hands pulsed stronger than it ever had before, spreading through her fingers and into her chest like a quiet, steady fire that refused to be ignored. Cale moved then, not quickly, not abruptly, but with a smooth, deliberate motion that drew every eye in the arena without effort. Each step measured, each movement controlled, and the distance between him and the center began to close. The sand shifted softly beneath his boots, the only sound that dared break the silence, and with each step, the weight of his presence seemed to deepen, pressing outward in a way that made even the highest seats in the stands feel closer, more confined, as if the entire arena had narrowed to a single point. Elena remained where she was, her shoulders squared, her stance steady, and though every instinct within her whispered that she should lower her gaze, should step back, should make herself smaller in the face of something so undeniably powerful, she did not, because something within her refused to retreat now, not after everything that had already changed. Cale stopped again, closer this time, close enough that the space between them felt charged, not with danger, but with something unspoken, something that hovered just beyond understanding. And for a moment that stretched longer than it should have, he said nothing, did nothing, simply looked at her as if weighing something that no one else could see. A faint shift moved through the crowd, not loud, not disruptive, but enough to ripple outward, the first sign of uncertainty breaking through the rigid stillness. Because this was not how these moments were supposed to unfold, not how the arena was meant to function. Elena felt it too, that fracture in expectation, and it steadied her in a way she had not anticipated, grounding her further, anchoring her presence in the center of a space that had once seemed determined to erase her. The warmth within her flared again, brighter now, more certain, and she let it settle, let it exist without questioning it, without trying to hide it from herself. And as she stood there, meeting his gaze without flinching, without lowering her head, something in the air shifted again, deeper this time, more final. Cale's expression did not change, not visibly, but there was a subtle shift in the focus of his eyes, a recognition that lingered for a fraction longer than before, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried effortlessly across the arena, low, steady, and absolute. Stop. And the single word did not echo, did not need to. It settled into the silence with a weight that left no room for question, no space for resistance. The arena obeyed before the command had even fully registered, the tension snapping into stillness so complete it felt as if time itself had paused, and Elena stood in the center of it all, her heartbeat steady, her breath even, her presence no longer overlooked or dismissed, but undeniably seen. as the moment that was never meant to happen unfolded in front of them all. The words settled into the arena like a weight that could not be lifted, and for a moment that stretched longer than any before it, no one moved, no one spoke, as if even the idea of breaking that silence had been stripped away. Elena felt it in the stillness of her own breath, in the way her heartbeat seemed louder now against the quiet, and yet steadier than it had ever been, as if something within her had finally aligned with the moment unfolding around her. Her opponent remained frozen where he stood, his head lowered, his earlier presence diminished into something almost unrecognizable, and the shift was not forced, not commanded through fear, but through something deeper, something absolute that did not require explanation. Cale Thornridge did not raise his voice again, did not repeat himself, because he did not need to. The single command had already reshaped the entire arena, bending it into a stillness that held even the highest seats in place. Elena became aware of the distance between them, no more than a few yards now, and yet it felt like something vast, something charged, not with threat, but with meaning she could not yet understand. And still, she did not step back, did not lower her gaze, her shoulders remaining squared, her stance grounded in a way that felt new, unfamiliar, but undeniably real. The warmth in her hands pulsed again, stronger than before, spreading up through her arms and into her chest, settling there like a steady light, and for the first time, she did not question it, did not try to explain it away. She simply let it exist, let it anchor her in the center of a moment that no longer felt like something happening to her, but something she was a part of. Cale took another step forward, slow, deliberate, closing the remaining distance until he stood just a few feet away, and the shift in the air was immediate, heavier, more defined, as if the space itself had recognized his presence and adjusted accordingly. Elena could see him clearly now, the sharp lines of his features, the calm intensity in his expression, but it was his eyes that held her, not cold, not distant, but focused in a way that made everything else fade, as if he saw only her and nothing else in that vast arena. The crowd stirred faintly, not daring to break the silence fully, but unable to remain completely still, their confusion growing, their expectations unraveling as the moment refused to follow any path they understood. Elena felt it, that unraveling, that quiet collapse of certainty around her, and instead of overwhelming her, it steadied her further, grounding her deeper into herself, into the space she occupied, into the presence she had fought to hold. Cale stopped directly in front of her, close enough now that the distance between them felt almost non-existent, and for a moment, he said nothing, did nothing, simply stood there, his gaze unwavering, as if measuring something beyond what anyone else could perceive. Elena met his eyes fully, her breath steady, her expression calm, and though every instinct told her that this was a moment that demanded submission, demanded acknowledgement of the power standing before her, she did not bow, did not look away, because something within her refused to diminish itself again, not after everything that had brought her here. The silence deepened, stretching, holding, and then Cale moved, not with force, not with urgency, but with a quiet certainty, his hand lifting slightly, not to command, not to threaten, but to acknowledge, and the motion alone sent a ripple through the crowd, a sharp intake of breath echoing from the stands as the moment shifted once more. Elena felt her own breath catch, just for a second, as that simple gesture carried more weight than anything that had come before it. And in that suspended moment, she understood that whatever came next would not be dictated by the arena, by the crowd, or by the rules they had all been bound to, but by something entirely different, something that had chosen to step into the center of it all. And as she stood there, facing him without retreat, without hesitation, Elena Whitmore realized that she was no longer the girl they had brought to break, but someone standing at the edge of something that would change everything. The space between them held, fragile and unbroken, as if the entire arena had narrowed into that single breath that neither of them had yet released. And Elena felt it in the way her chest rose slowly, deliberately, her lungs filling with air that felt heavier than before, not because it was difficult, but because it mattered now. Every movement, every second stretching longer than it should. Cale's hand remained lifted, not reaching for her, not touching, but present, a quiet acknowledgement. that carried more weight than any command he could have given, and Elena's gaze dropped to it for the briefest moment before returning to his eyes, steady, unflinching, as if she understood without needing words that this was not a test of strength, but something else entirely. The crowd shifted again, a low murmur rising like a distant tide, confusion threading through it, disbelief beginning to take shape as the moment continued to unfold in a way none of them had expected, because this was not how the arena worked, not how these stories ended. And yet here it was, refusing to follow the path they had all anticipated. Elena felt the weight of those expectations pressing at the edges of her awareness, the countless assumptions that had been placed on her before she ever stepped onto the sand, and for the first time, they felt distant, less solid, as if they no longer had the power to define her in the way they once had. The warmth in her hands pulsed again, steady and certain, no longer something she questioned or feared, but something she accepted, something that belonged to her in a way nothing else in this place ever had. And as it spread through her chest, it steadied her further, grounding her in a calm that felt almost unfamiliar in its clarity. Cale's gaze did not waver, his focus unwavering, as if he were seeing not just the girl standing before him, but something beyond that, something deeper, and Elena felt it like a quiet recognition that settled into the space between them, not spoken, not explained, but undeniably present. Her opponent remained where he had stepped back, unmoving, silent, as if the moment had already passed him by, and the arena itself seemed to follow that same shift, its attention no longer fixed on the outcome it had expected, but on the exchange unfolding at its center. Elena drew in another slow breath, her voice quiet when she finally spoke, but clear, steady, carrying across the small distance between them without effort. "I will not bow." And the words were not defiant, not challenging, but simple, a statement of truth that settled into the silence with a weight all its own. The reaction was immediate, a sharp intake of breath from the crowd, a ripple of shock that moved through the stands as the words reached them, because this was not something they were meant to hear, not something an Omega was meant to say in the presence of the Alpha King. And yet there it was, undeniable, unhidden. Elena held his gaze, waiting, not with fear, not with expectation, but with a quiet certainty that whatever came next would not undo what she had just claimed for herself. Cale did not react immediately, did not move, did not speak, and the silence that followed stretched, deepening, becoming something almost tangible as the entire arena waited for his response, for the correction, the command, the inevitable reassertion of order. But it did not come, not in the way they expected. Instead, something shifted in his expression, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough that Elena saw it, that small change in focus, in recognition, as if her words had not challenged him, but confirmed something he had already begun to see. The moment held, suspended between what had always been and what was beginning to change, and Elena stood in the center of it. No longer shrinking beneath the weight of the arena, no longer defined by the voices that had once surrounded her, but by the quiet, unyielding presence she had chosen to hold. And in that silence, deeper and more charged than anything that had come before, it became clear that this was no longer about survival, no longer about enduring what had been placed before her, but about something entirely different, something that neither the crowd nor the arena could control, something that had begun the moment she refused to disappear. The silence did not break the way the arena expected it to. It deepened, stretching into something heavier, something that pressed against every breath taken within its walls, and Elena felt it settle into her bones as she held her ground, her words still lingering in the air between them like a line that could not be crossed back over. Cale Thornridge did not look away, did not react with anger or dismissal, and that absence of reaction was what unsettled the crowd the most, a ripple of unease moving through the stands as the moment refused to resolve into something familiar. Elena's heartbeat remained steady, though she could feel the weight of every gaze shifting toward her now, no longer dismissive, no longer careless, but searching, uncertain, as if trying to understand how the girl they had mocked only minutes ago now stood unmoved in front of the Alpha King. Cale lowered his hand slowly, not abrupt, not dismissive, but deliberate, and the motion alone carried meaning, a quiet acknowledgement that settled into the space between them. He stepped closer, closing the final distance until only a single pace separated them, and the air shifted again, sharper now, more defined, as if the space itself had tightened around their presence. Elena did not retreat, did not lower her gaze, her shoulders remaining squared, her expression calm. Though her breath caught for the briefest second as the closeness made everything more real, more immediate. She could see the details now. The faint lines of tension in his jaw, the stillness in his posture that was not rigid, but controlled, as if every movement he made was chosen with precision. The crowd stirred again, louder this time, the uncertainty growing, voices rising in uneven waves as the tension became too much to contain, and yet no one dared step forward, no one dared interrupt, because whatever was unfolding no longer belonged to them. Cale's gaze shifted slightly, not away from her, but through her, as if seeing something deeper than what stood before him, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried across the arena with a quiet authority that did not need force to command. Attention, who placed her here? And the question was not directed at her, not an accusation, but a demand that cut through the confusion like a clear line. The reaction was immediate, the crowd falling into a sharper silence, the earlier murmurs fading as attention shifted outward, toward the edges of the arena where those in charge stood. Elena felt it, that shift, the way the focus moved away from her for the first time since she had stepped onto the sand. And yet she did not move, did not relax, because something told her that this moment was not over, not yet. No answer came immediately, only a hesitation that stretched too long, and Cale's expression did not change, but the stillness in him sharpened, becoming something more defined, something that carried weight without needing to rise in volume. Elena felt the warmth in her chest flare again, stronger now, steady and unwavering, and for a moment, she wondered if he could sense it too, if that was what held his attention so completely, but she did not ask, did not break the silence that had settled so heavily between them. The question lingered in the air, unanswered, and the tension grew, tightening around the arena like a held breath waiting to be released. Elena's gaze remained locked with his, her presence steady, her stance unchanged, and in that moment, she understood something she had not before, that this was no longer about proving herself to the crowd, no longer about surviving their expectations, but about something far greater, something that had drawn his attention in a way she could not yet fully understand. Cale took one more step, not past her, not around her, but to stand directly before her, and the space between them disappeared entirely, leaving only the weight of his presence and the quiet certainty in her own. The arena waited, suspended between what had been and what was about to become, and Elena Whitmore stood at the center of it, no longer overlooked, no longer dismissed, but chosen by the moment itself, as the story they had all expected continued to unravel. No one answered him, and that silence said more than any confession could have, stretching across the arena like a truth no one dared to claim, and Elena felt it settle into the space between heartbeats, the way uncertainty now clung to every corner of the stands where confidence had once ruled. Cale Thornridge did not repeat his question, did not demand louder, because he did not need to. The weight of it remained, pressing outward until even those who had orchestrated the spectacle could no longer hide behind the noise of the crowd. Elena stood still, her breath steady, though she could feel the shift around her, the subtle unraveling of authority that had once seemed unshakable, and for the first time, she was no longer the center of ridicule, but the center of something far more dangerous, far more unpredictable. A figure moved at the edge of the arena, hesitant, uncertain, stepping forward only when the silence became too heavy to endure, and Elena's gaze flickered briefly in that direction before returning to Cale, because something told her that whatever answer came would not matter as much as the moment already unfolding between them. It was a trial. The voice came, strained, careful, as if each word had to be weighed before being spoken, a demonstration of capability, and the explanation faltered before it could fully form, breaking under the weight of its own inadequacy. The crowd reacted in a low murmur, uncertainty threading through their voices, because even they could hear it, the weakness in the answer, the failure of it to justify what had been done. Cale's expression did not change, but something in his stillness sharpened, not louder, not more visible, but more defined, as if the air itself had drawn a line that could not be ignored. Elena felt it in her chest, that quiet tension, and the warmth within her responded, steady and unwavering, grounding her in a way that made the moment feel clear despite everything shifting around her. A demonstration, Cale repeated, his voice low, even, but carrying across the arena with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. And though the words were simple, they carried a weight that made the explanation crumble further under its own lack of substance. The figure at the edge of the arena faltered, stepping back slightly, as if realizing too late that there was no safe ground to stand on, no justification that could hold against the scrutiny now focused upon them. Elena remained where she was, her gaze steady, her presence quiet but undeniable, and she could feel it, the way the attention of the entire arena had shifted, no longer judging her, but watching, waiting, uncertain of what would come next. Cale turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the speaker without fully shifting his focus, and that small movement carried more authority than any raised voice could have, because it made it clear that the explanation had been heard and dismissed. "She stands," he said, and this time, his words were directed not at the crowd, not at the officials, but at the moment itself, at the reality unfolding before them, and Elena felt it like a quiet confirmation that settled into her chest, steady and certain. The crowd reacted again, a ripple of confusion moving through the stands. Because the statement did not resolve anything, did not restore order, did not return the arena to what it had been. Instead, it seemed to solidify the shift that had already begun, making it undeniable, irreversible. Elena drew in a slow breath, her heartbeat steady, her gaze still locked with his. And though she did not fully understand what was happening, she understood this, that she was no longer standing alone in the center of a space designed to break her, that something had changed, something that could not be undone. Cale took a small step closer, not enough to invade, not enough to overwhelm, but enough to close the final distance that had remained between them, and the air seemed to still. Once more, the tension tightening into something almost tangible. Elena did not move, did not retreat, her shoulders squared, her presence steady, and as she stood there, meeting him without flinching, without lowering her gaze, she realized that whatever came next would not erase what had already been claimed, not by the arena, not by the crowd, but by her. And in that moment, held between silence and revelation, it became clear that the story they had all expected had already ended, and something entirely new had begun. The air did not release the tension that had gathered. It held it, tightening around the arena like something waiting to be named, and Elena felt it settle deeper within her, not as pressure now, but as clarity, as if every uncertain edge of the moment had begun to sharpen into something undeniable. Cale Thornridge stood before her, close enough that the space between them no longer felt like distance, but like a line drawn with purpose, and for a brief second, neither of them moved, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching until it became something more than absence of sound, something filled with meaning. Elena's breath remained steady, though she could feel the warmth in her chest pulsing stronger than ever, no longer faint, no longer something she questioned, but something alive, something that responded to the presence before her in a way she could not ignore. The crowd shifted again, a low murmur rising, but it lacked the sharpness it once had, lacked the certainty, as if whatever had been broken in the rhythm of the arena could not be repaired, not by noise, not by expectation. Cale's gaze remained fixed on her, unwavering, and when he moved, it was not abrupt, not forceful, but deliberate, his hand extending fully now, not in command, not in demand, but in something far more significant, an offering that carried a weight the entire arena could feel without understanding. Elena's breath caught, just for a moment, as she looked at his hand, then back to his eyes, searching for something that would tell her this was not real, that this was some continuation of the spectacle meant to undo her. But there was nothing of that there, no mockery, no test, only certainty. The silence deepened again, sharper this time, because now the entire arena understood that something irreversible was about to happen, something that did not belong to the rules they had all followed. Elena hesitated, not out of fear, but out of the weight of the choice in front of her, because this was not about survival anymore, not about enduring what had been placed before her. This was something else entirely, something that would define what came next. The warmth in her hands surged again, steady and bright, and for the first time, it did not feel like something small, something hidden. It felt like something real, something that belonged in the open, and she let it guide her, not forcefully, not urgently, but with a quiet certainty that matched the presence before her. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her hand, her fingers steady as they moved toward his, and the moment stretched. Every eye in the arena fixed on that single motion, every breath held, every expectation suspended. When her hand met his, the contact was not overwhelming, not sudden, but grounding, steady, as if something that had been unbalanced had finally found its center, and Elena felt it immediately. That shift, not in the arena, not in the crowd, but within herself, something aligning, something settling into place. The reaction was immediate, a sharp intake of breath echoing from the stands, followed by a ripple of disbelief that spread outward, because this was not something they had come to witness, not something they had been prepared to accept. Cale did not tighten his grip, did not pull her forward. He simply held her hand, his presence steady, his gaze still locked with hers, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the arena with a clarity that left no room for doubt. "She stands with me." And the words did not rise, did not echo. They settled, firm and absolute, into the space that had been waiting for them. Elena felt it, the shift that followed, not subtle, not uncertain, but undeniable, as if the entire arena had been forced to recognize something it could not ignore, something that had already taken root the moment she refused to bow. The crowd reacted in waves, shock, disbelief, confusion, but none of it broke the moment. None of it changed what had been declared, and Elena stood there, her hand in his, her presence steady, no longer defined by what they had called her, but by what had just been claimed. And in that stillness, deeper and more final than anything that had come before, it became clear that this was no longer a moment within the arena, but the beginning of something that would reach far beyond it. For a moment, no one moved, not even the wind that had once carried the noise of the arena, as if the world itself had paused to witness what had just been spoken, and Elena felt it in the way her breath settled into something calm, something steady, no longer fighting against the weight around her, but existing within it without fear. Her hand remained in his, the contact firm yet unforced, grounding in a way she had never experienced before, and she realized with a quiet clarity that this was not about being lifted from the arena, not about being saved from it, but about being seen within it, exactly as she was. The crowd did not erupt the way it once would have. There was no immediate surge of sound, no clear reaction, only a fractured murmur that struggled to take shape, disbelief clashing with something deeper, something that could not be denied even if it was not understood. Elena's gaze lifted slowly, not away from Cale, but beyond him for just a second, taking in the vast space that had once felt suffocating, and now felt different, not smaller, not weaker, but changed, as if the very ground beneath her feet had shifted into something new. She saw the faces in the stands, the same ones that had laughed, that had dismissed her, and now they looked back with uncertainty, with hesitation, with something that bordered on recognition, and it did not overwhelm her the way it once would have. It did not make her shrink, because she was no longer standing in their shadow. Cale released her hand slowly, not pulling away, but allowing the moment to settle into its own weight, and even without the contact, the presence between them remained, steady, undeniable, as if something had already been set in motion that could not be undone. He turned slightly then, his gaze sweeping outward across the arena, and the shift was immediate, the crowd straightening, the uncertainty tightening in his silence once more, because whatever doubt had lingered before, his presence alone was enough to hold it in place. "This ends now," he said, his voice carrying across the arena with quiet finality, not loud, not forceful, but absolute, and there was no resistance, no question, only the immediate stillness of obedience that followed. Elena felt the words settle around her, not as an ending, but as a closing of something that had already begun to fall apart the moment she refused to bow. And as she stood there, She understood that this was not the end of her story, not even close. It was only the point where it changed direction entirely. The officials at the edges of the arena moved quickly now, their earlier hesitation gone, replaced by a need to restore order, to reshape the space into something that made sense again. But it felt different, forced, as if they were trying to rebuild something that had already been altered beyond repair. Elena did not move immediately, her feet still grounded in the sand, her shoulders steady, her presence calm. And for a moment, she simply stood there, allowing everything that had happened to settle into her, not as a distant memory, but as something real, something she could carry forward. Kale glanced back at her then, just once. A brief acknowledgement that did not need words. And in that look, she felt it again. That same quiet recognition that had begun the moment he stepped into the arena, and she knew, without needing it to be spoken, that this was not the last time their paths would cross. The crowd began to shift again, not into noise, but into movement, people rising, turning, leaving with glances cast back toward the center, toward her, as if trying to hold onto the moment even as it slipped away from them. Elena exhaled slowly, the air leaving her lungs with a steadiness that felt new. And as she took her first step away from the exact spot where everything had changed, she realized that she was not walking away from what had happened. She was walking forward into what it had made possible. The arena would remember this moment. She knew that, the way the silence had fallen, the way the Alpha King had stepped in, the way everything they believed had been challenged in a single, undeniable shift. And though the crowd would tell the story in their own way, twist it, reshape it, one truth would remain untouched. Elena Whitmore had not bowed, and the world had changed around her because of it. And somewhere, beyond the walls of the arena, beyond the reach of the voices that had once defined her, something new was already beginning, something that would not ask her to shrink, something that would not demand her silence, something that would rise from the quiet strength she had chosen to hold. And as she walked forward, steady and unafraid, one thought settled clearly in her mind, not loud, not dramatic, but certain. The kind of certainty that did not need to be spoken aloud to be true. This was only the beginning.